Our next lesson in the Civil War is called Being a Soldier. Okay, our goal is to describe the life of a common soldier during the Civil War. Look at your vocabulary words. The act of leaving the armed forces without permission is desertion. To be lazy or to have a lack of discipline is lax. Suitable for drinking because it contains no harmful elements is potable. Happening in an unrestrained manner in a way regarded as a menace is rampant. To gain acceptance or approval is woo. Being a soldier. Wanted, young men between the ages of 18 and 30 who are eager to see America. No experience necessary. Free room and board, starting pay $13 a month, apply within. Okay, the ad might sound pretty good except for the $13 salary. But if you had been a young immigrant just newly arrived to the United States in the mid-19th century and unemployed, this amount of money would have sounded really sweet. What was the catch, you might have asked? It was called the Army. So often history tries in various ways to make war and those involved in it seem like a very glorious affair. In reality, war for the most part was very tedious and boring, especially for those conflicts prior to the 20th century. The life of a common soldier and the experiences he dealt with on a daily basis were mediocre at best. No study about the Civil War would be complete without looking at the lives of those who fought in it. Like all conflicts before and after, the life of a soldier was nothing like the ads portrayed it to be. Sure, there was free room and board. Those who enlisted got to see America. The pay wasn't all that great, but it was income. What made it unexpected was all the routine experiences, dull, boring, and at times terrifying. Recruiting and readiness. Okay. Recruiting and readiness. So, in your notes, go ahead and put today's date. The soldiers who fought for the Union and Confederacy found that war was much different from the way it was portrayed by recruiters. Those who answered the romantic call of flag and country in 1861 and the years that followed were no better prepared for these everyday realities than they were for the shock of combat. When recruiters tried to woo young men to sign up, often they appealed to the person's patriotism and sense of honor. For those in the North, it was a call to preserve the Union. For recruits in the South, it was a call to fight against federal tyranny. The idea of making a living was obviously one thing that appealed to recruits. In the North, thousands of young men were immigrating to America. The influx of manpower and the general lack of jobs made going into the Army a necessity. Like many things, life in the Army was not exactly the way it was portrayed. So let's talk about recruiting and readiness. Recruiting and readiness. Okay, and it said how they would recruit soldiers in the North. They told him it was a call to preserve the Union. How they recruited soldiers in the South. They said it was a call to fight against federal tyranny. Forgot my R there. And what made people really want to join the military was the fact that there was a lack of jobs. At least being in the military, you get paid something. But it was not exactly the way it was portrayed. Army life was a case of culture shock for many young men. The new lifestyle involved conditions they were not accustomed to. For example, they were forced to live among thousands of people in close quarters. Okay. So living conditions. For being in the Army. You lived with thousands in close quarters. That part really wasn't all that different. Many of them were used to that. Many recruits had rural backgrounds and their customs, languages, and experience. They have lived on small farms or in tiny villages and towns. Military living conditions offered little to no sense of privacy. Okay, so I'm going to put no privacy. Recruits lived in tents and slept on mats outdoors regardless of weather conditions. Okay, live and sleep outdoors. Most of us have been camping, but probably not in the middle of the winter. There were endless amounts of drilling and marching as they trained to work together to form cohesive units. So there was much time drilling. So we're going to talk about recruiting and readiness. To recruit people into the military, the North said it was a call to preserve the Union. The South said it was a call to fight against the federal tyranny. And there were a lack of jobs, so many people were willing to join the military because they needed a job. The living conditions in the military, they lived with thousands in close quarters, and a lot of people were used to that. There was no privacy. They had to live and sleep outdoors. There was much time drilling. Discipline was very rigid, something many were totally unprepared for. They were used to getting up when they wanted to and going to bed at different hours. Okay. So I'm going to put discipline. They needed discipline. When they first joined the military, they had a lack of discipline. In addition, few understood the importance of routine drills and those endless marches until they experienced battle for the first time. After weeks of training, the men were finally ordered to march toward the depot or shipyard. They would climb aboard trains or ships and head off for some unknown destination. Common characteristics of the Army. Okay, common characteristics of armies. The troops of the Union and the Confederacy actually had much in common with one another. Serving in the Army meant they would spend many months away from friends and family. Unlike today, when a soldier can call or email relatives quite often, many families did not hear from loved ones for extended months. Mail was inefficient and slow. Those who became terribly homesick or could no longer suffer through the horrors of war often deserted. Okay. Today we have, like it said, we have various forms of communication. We have Skype, we have emails, we have texts. They didn't have any of that back then, so there was little communication. Like I said, the mail was slow. Sometimes it would get through, but it was just, when you wrote a letter, it took a long time to hear anything back. Most troops were white, Protestant, unmarried, and young. Minimum age for both armies was 18, and the vast majority of recruits fell between the ages of 18 and 29. Okay. It said most troops were white, Protestant, single, and young. Let's talk about both sides of the war. And it says as the war progressed, younger and younger boys joined the military. Even though this was not endorsed by the government, some casualties were as young as 14. So at first, the ages were 18 to 29. The ages were 18. Most of the ones that enrolled, that enlisted, were 18 to 29. And got younger as the war progressed. Okay, we read before that some of the casualties were as young as 14. Both armies employed Native Americans in their forces. Most of the Native people fought in campaigns west of the Mississippi. They tended to support the Confederacy more than the Union. The way Native nations had been treated by the federal government over the years may have played a part in their decision back to the South. Okay. It said that Native Americans they said they were in both armies. Most supported the South because they're mad at our government. They're upset with the way we treated the Indians when we came from England, because many white people treated them wrong. Black soldiers were not employed until 1862, when the Union began putting together regiments composed of former slaves and freedmen. At first they were not considered adequate soldiers and saw no combat. As the war progressed, however, they proved their merit over and over again. By the end of the war, thousands of African American troops took part in the siege of Petersburg and the fall of Richmond. The Confederacy refused to employ blacks in the army right up to the very end, when Robert E. Lee finally convinced President Davis to allow them to fight. At the time Lee surrendered, there were at least 2 units being trained. That was mainly because the South was afraid that if they let the blacks fight, they would fight with the North, because they wanted their freedom. So for blacks, okay, so the North, they started fighting in 1862. The South, they started fighting right at the very end of the war. Okay? So we said common characteristics of the armies. There was little communication when you were in the military. Most were white Protestant, single and young. When they recruited them, most of them recruited were 18 to 29 years old. But as the war progressed, younger and younger boys were enlisting in the military. We said Native Americans fought for both the North and the South, but most of them supported the South. Blacks fought for the North and the South. The North starting allowing blacks to fight in 1862, and the South, it was almost right at the end of the war. For those men who did not want to join and who had been conscripted, drafted, there was a way out of the military. This can be done one of 2 ways. They could find someone to take their place as a substitute, or they could opt out by paying $300. This was a lot of money in the 60s, and very few could afford to pay it. I don't think there's an option of opting out today. So they could opt out of the draft. Opt out of the draft 2 ways. 1, they could find a replacement, somebody to go in their place, and 2, they could pay $300. Well, if you think of it this way, it said that they paid $13 a month to join the military. Okay, so you don't have to put this in your notes, I just want you to see this. Then, now, okay? If they can live on $13 a month, let's say today, I think we're going to say, I don't know, $2,000 a month? $2,000 a month? So if they could pay $300 to get out of the military, that's almost that times 30 would be $390. So if I multiplied 2,000 times 30, I would get about 60,000. And this isn't accurate by any means. But to pay a fee to get out of the military would cost about this much now. Okay, so $300 doesn't sound like a lot to us, but if you think of $60,000, that's a lot. So few people could afford to pay to get out of the military. Okay, camp life. So let's talk about camp life. I'm sure it's not the kind of camp that we're thinking of. So 3, Well, not 3, but let's talk about camp life. During times between marches or battles, life was dull and routine. Roll call was at 5 each day. Okay, so we'll start with in the morning roll call. Okay. 5 a.m. They have roll call. After breakfast, they had drills performed, and then some soldiers were assigned to various duties. Okay, roll call, they would have breakfast. And then whatever duties they had. Don't know. I forgot to put the drills, didn't I? Sorry. They had breakfast. Then they had their drills. Okay, then whatever duties they were assigned to. This life might go on for weeks at a time. Those who did not perform their duties correctly or became lax in their discipline were punished. Lax or not done correctly were punished. These punishments were often harsh. The most common infraction was drunkenness. You could be hung by your thumbs, put in the sweat box, or even court-martialed. Okay, it says you could opt out of the draft 2 ways. You could find a replacement, or you could pay a $300 fee. Camp life, we're starting to talk about camp life. We said roll call is at 5 o'clock every morning, and I wouldn't have a problem with that. I usually get up about 5 anyway, but I don't know if I could do that every morning. They would eat breakfast, do drills, and then they had duties. If they didn't do their drills correctly or their duties correctly, if they become lax, they were punished. Let's talk about the punishment. It says that punishments. So punishment. Okay, the most common infraction was drunkenness. So drunkenness was the most common infraction. And it said you could be hung by your thumbs. I'm not going to put a 1 by that. I'm just going to put a dot. Okay, 1. You could be hung by your thumbs. You could be put in the sweat box. I don't really know what that is. Put in sweat box. Maybe it's just a place that's really hot. Or you could even be court-martialed. Other times, troops were allowed to work things out for themselves. It was not uncommon for soldiers to duel or get into fistfights. Okay, soldiers. Sometimes they let the soldiers work it out. And they would do this with duels. Or a fist fight. You're vicious. Okay, we said that the most common infraction was drunkenness. Their punishments, they could be hung by their thumbs, put in the sweat box, or even court-martialed. Sometimes they let the soldiers work it out. Soldiers would duel or even fist fight. One of the most negative aspects of camp life for both Blue and the Gray was that alcohol abuse was rampant, which is why drunkenness was the most common infraction. The soldiers drank anything they could get a hold of. If real alcohol could be sneaked into the camp, soldiers would find different ingredients to use to create something. Tar water, turpentine, brown sugar, and lamp oil were all drunk by the soldiers, just to get a buzz. Many drank to relieve the horrors of the war. Let's look at the blue box. Did you know? Both armies wore woolen uniforms that were itchy and uncomfortable. Food was similarly unpleasant, consisting mostly of hardtack biscuits, salted pork or beef, and vegetables whenever they were available. Of great importance to both sides was coffee. At one time, the military provided essence of coffee for the troops. Coffee mixed with sugar and milk was boiled into a thick paste. This was then given to the soldiers, who would mix it with hot water. Yummy. As you can imagine, it did wonders for the digestive tract, but we will not go there. When coffee became scarce in the South, troops would substitute with various vegetables and nuts. Unfortunately, these mixtures were not very strong and tasted awful. Okay. Okay, it said that alcohol abuse the soldiers would drink anything they could get a hold of. So they would sneak real alcohol in, and they would mix it with just different ingredients. Ooh, this keeps falling on me. We said that some of the things they mixed it with: tar water, turpentine, brown sugar, and even lamp oil. They would drink either to get a buzz, get drunk, or just so they could forget about the horrors of the war. it says that uniforms were made of wool, and if you've ever wore anything made of wool, you know it is extremely itchy, like you have a wool blanket. In fact, let me put this over here beside it. Okay, they're made of wool and they were itchy. We said the food was unpleasant. And it was mainly hardtack biscuits, salted pork or beef, and vegetables. And let's see, we said there was alcohol abuse in both of the armies. The soldiers would sneak in real alcohol and mix it with different ingredients. Some of them just to get a buzz, sometimes to escape from the horrors of the war. The uniforms, they wore wool uniforms, and wool is very itchy. The food was unpleasant. It was hardtack biscuits, salt pork, and beef, and vegetables as long as they had some. Okay, and it said coffee was important in the military. Coffee mixed with sugar and milk. Okay. Mixed with sugar and milk. It was boiled into a paste. Doesn't sound that great, does it? Okay, the soldiers would mix it with hot water. Okay, and then when coffee became scarce in the South, so in the South, when coffee was scarce, they would substitute it with vegetables and nuts. With berries and nuts, and that tasted nasty. I imagine this didn't taste very good either, but this tasted gross. Men were always looking for other ways to entertain themselves. Gambling was the most common way to pass time. Okay, gambling. They gambled on everything. There were typical forms of gambling such as cards, dice, fights, and races. When those did not suffice, other unusual types of gambling took place. Cockroach racing was popular. Soldiers kept pet cockroaches in matchboxes and used them to race against other roaches. The bugs were placed in a large circle, and the first roach to bug out of there won. So they gamble on everything. Gambling on everything. They gambled on all the things that we know about, and the one thing that they had were cockroach races. The soldiers also enjoyed listening to music and reading, if they found a book and could read. Prostitutes were commonplace, and sports such as a crude form of baseball were even available in some places. We talked about the soldiers had coffee. They would mix it with sugar and milk, and it was boiled to a paste, and then it was given to the soldiers. The soldiers would mix it with hot water. When coffee became scarce in the South, they substituted it with berries and nuts, and that didn't taste very good. They said they gambled on everything, cards, dice, all of that. Plus they had cockroach races, and we said that they would put them in a circle, and the first to bug out won. So they weren't really racing, they're racing to get out. The soldiers would listen to music. And of course, they would read a book, if they could read, and if they could find a book. Sports, such as a crude form of baseball, were even available in some places. There were other issues faced by the Civil War. The lack of food and its poor quality caused many health problems. Okay. Health problems. Because of the lack of food, and lack of shelter, or poor shelter during the winter months. The lack of potato water certainly was a problem faced throughout the year. Okay, lack of potato water. No, potable water. I didn't think that sounded right. Lack of potable water. Potato water. Potable water. Certainly was a problem faced throughout the year. We said potable means that it's safe to drink. And so if they had a lack of potable water, that means their water had diseases in it, and so it was causing scurvy, fever, malaria, and dysentery. Knowing the issues and characteristics of Army life during the Civil War helps to generate an appreciation for the sacrifices made by thousands of men. They endured terrific hardships for a cause many did not even fully understand. They were forced to witness and participate in the killing and maiming of thousands. The sheer terror of going into battle was a constant burden, yet both armies continued to stand tall for their respective causes. So other forms of entertainment, they like to listen to music, read. There were health problems because of the lack of food, the lack of shelter, and the lack of potable water. So let's review. Characteristics of both armies include constant drilling and marching, poor diets, poor sleeping conditions, a lot of boredom and repetition, playing games and gambling, and excessive drinking. Army life was a culture shock to many who, for the first time, experienced living in close quarters with thousands of others, sleeping and living out of tents or in open air, endless drilling and marching, strict discipline and harsh punishment. Native Americans fought for both sides, but blacks were mainly employed by the North. A man could get out of serving in the military by getting someone to take his place or by paying $300. Go ahead and review this lesson, study your notes, and answer the questions.